Hey there, welcome back to another video. This time around, it is my review of the 2025 horror film, The Woman in the Yard. The Woman in the Yard is another film from Blumhouse that came out earlier this year and pretty much came and went just like the other horror films that they released last year around the same time. Honestly, Blumhouse has lost some serious momentum, if you ask me. They have just been pumping out turd after turd, and this is just another one. I would say it's not as bad as Imaginary or Night Swim, but it's still not what I would consider to be a good horror film. Really, its biggest problem is the tone deaf writing and the simple fact that it's just really boring. Now, before I get around to sharing more of my thoughts on it, though, I would like to give a special shout out to Shine for requesting another review. The Woman in the Yard is directed by Jaume Collet-Serra, and he's a director who I honestly like, but he's also a director who has a mixed track record. He's done some films I love, like the House of Wax remake or The Shallows, and then he's also done some other movies which I didn't care for at all, or other films that are just very forgettable and very mid at best. And The Woman in Black is more of the latter. The direction, though, is not the problem. I think Sarah's direction is actually pretty solid for the most part. Good usage of camera angles. There's even some moments where he flips the camera rather effectively. Some good tracking shots. And overall, I did like the camera techniques that he employed throughout this. At points, it actually did add to the film in a very positive way. It actually made the film kind of suspenseful, even though there isn't a whole lot of suspense or tension in the film because of how it's written. But due to the direction, there actually were some scenes of the woman in black terrorizing this family with her ghostly shadows or her poltergeist activity that actually created some effective chills. There were even some moments where the direction actually created a jump scare that actually worked. So I think direction wise, this is actually a pretty efficient film. Uh, the fact that it's one of the more well-directed horror films that Blumhouse has come out with in a while makes it so much more frustrating that this is such a bland and boring and forgettable movie because there's potential here. There's some good direction. And I also think there are other elements of this film that actually are good as well. The screenplay is not one of them, though, by Sam Stefanak. This screenplay is just every cliche that you can possibly think of when it comes to a elevated horror film or a grief or a trauma horror, and it really makes the film not only predictable but incredibly boring in terms of its story. From the very moment the woman in black shows up outside of this family's farmhouse, you can automatically figure out where it's going to go. You know what the twist is. You know that the woman in black is the woman who's experiencing depression and is struggling, and you can pretty much predict where everything is going to go from that point, except for an incredibly tone deaf ending that in a really warped way almost creates an idealized take on suicide. And I'm still trying to wrap my head around it, to be perfectly honest. So the story centers around this woman named Ramona, who's a widow because her husband died in a car accident, and she's not only a widow, but she's also disabled. She has to walk around on crutches because of her injuries, and she lives with her two children, Taylor and Annie. But right from the start, she is very, honestly, I would say not only just strict, but mean to her kids because of all the stress and the trauma that she's going through. And on top of that, her home is without power, and that's creating its own bit of stress and triggering moments for her fragile mental state. And then there's this woman in black and this black veil that shows up in a chair in a field across from their house, and Ramona goes to talk to the woman, and the woman says today's the day, and says all kinds of things that are um, vague, but allude to a twist that is very common in these kind of stories. And Ramona is trying to get her children to stay away from this woman in black, and Taylor wants to take things into his own hands and get rid of the woman in black and go get a gun and threaten the woman and get her off their property, but Ramona doesn't want him to do that. Eventually, he winds up going and getting the gun, and he threatens the woman in black, but then the woman in black tells Taylor a harsh truth about his mother, that she was lying to him about what happened to his father, and that his father didn't die in some sort of freak accident, where they did, they just slipped on some ice or something like that when they were driving. His father died because right after a tense dinner between Ramona and her husband, she got in the car and they were driving down the road and she wasn't paying attention, and she wound up hitting somebody and it wound up killing her husband. So, understandably, because of that, Taylor is now even more guarded against his mother. And during a lot of this, you see scenes that make it seem as if Ramona has hurt her children, like a scene where she stabbed her daughter or did something to Taylor, but then you find out that that wasn't the case, or depending on your interpretation, she actually did enact it, and this is just the reality of what she did to her children seeping through. And the woman in black gets closer and closer to the house, and then ultimately winds up inside of it and is terrorizing the house and moving things around in the way that a poltergeist would, knocking stuff off tables, moving the chandelier around on the ceiling, so on and so forth. And the woman in black targets Ramona. You then find out, in the most obvious twist ever, that the woman in black is Ramona, or is some extension of Ramona's grief and her sadness and her angst. And the woman in black starts manipulating Ramona, shows her imagery of her kids doing well without her. And then the film basically ends with Ramona allowing this dark presence which might as well be a manifestation of death as well as her own grief and trauma. And this manifestation takes hold and manipulates her to the point where she takes her own life. Now, if the film just ended there, I would still have problems with it because it's so boring and barely nothing happens for the first 40 minutes. And the twist is predictable, and the characters are just not that engaging. Ramona, in particular, is a very unlikable character. I get it. That's the realism of it. That's how it actually is in a lot of these sort of instances. That being said, I don't really think you needed to have her be such an extreme, have her be so mean to her kids, for instance, yelling at her daughter for, getting the wrong hump, which that that just sounds off. I know it's not what they're referencing. They're referencing the hump on the letter R when you write the letter R on a piece of paper. But you got to get the hump the right way. Like that just sounds weird. And she's just verbally abusive to her children. Even gets to the point where she's also very close to being physically abusive to them. And I understand she's going through a lot, but at the same time, it's hard to be that sympathetic when she's taking it as far as she does. And instead, you sympathize more with her kids than you do with Ramona, and they're not really that much of a focus. It's more of Ramona and the woman in black, which is just an extension of herself anyway. If the character Ramona was written in a way where there was more about her that made her more likable and personable, and her moments of her falling apart actually were upsetting in that way because you've seen the good in her, then I think that would be a lot more effective. Because you see somebody who has so much potential, who was such a great parent, and then is just succumbing to the darkness inside of her. That would be a lot more effective to me in terms of the storytelling than what the writer decided to do here. Uh, where he basically wrote this character as if she was just being manipulated by the darkness from the very moment that you saw her on the screen. So then when you get to the point where the spirit, or the manifestation of her grief and trauma takes over and shows her a false glimpse of how her children's lives would be better without her, and then ultimately leads her to getting a gun and killing herself. It just makes for an incredibly bleak and hopeless story that doesn't really have anything in terms of a light at the end of the tunnel. So there isn't really any catharsis at the end. So you're dealt with all this, you're shown all of these traumatic moments and all of this dark, disturbing stuff, and then there's no catharsis at the end whatsoever because she just succumbs to it entirely. Now, if there was something at the end that showcased that her decisions actually led to something negative in terms of her being trapped in this hellish purgatory where she's constantly hurt and there's no power in her house, and her kids don't get along, and the woman in black is just constantly terrorizing her at every turn. That would be one thing. But the way that the film ends, it ends in a way that insinuates that this darkness, these suicidal thoughts that she had that ultimately take hold, create this alternate timeline or this alternate afterlife where everything is wonderful, where the power is on, where the dog is still alive, where she and her kids get along peacefully, and the house is fixed. And to me, that is an incredibly tone deaf thing for a writer to do for a film that features so much imagery and so much themes surrounding suicide. It essentially is creating an idealized fantasy world for Ramona that she's able to enter once she kills herself. I don't know about you, but that's incredibly fucked up and really tone deaf. And like I said, if it condemned the act that she ultimately did, that would be one thing. But it doesn't really do that in the end because it's trying to be clever and it's trying to be different with a twist on top of another twist. And to me, it just backfires completely and it doesn't work at all. And it's a mess, and it's honestly more confusing than anything else because it makes the tone all over the place, and then it makes you question what the hell was even the whole purpose of this story. And it really does feel like a story at the end of the day that at best would be in an anthology show or a part of an anthology film, and there's not enough there in terms of the story for an hour and 20 minutes, let alone even longer than that. Like, it's just one of those things where I'm okay with a film that is this bleak, that has this kind of dark, twisted message to it, mixed in with some reality. And it does hint at her being in this mirror world, this different afterlife, often throughout the film, almost to the point where it's a little too on the nose, like a marquee at a movie theater saying, "Oh, hey, the Mirror with Two Faces is playing tonight at the theater." Like, you're like, ah, come on, like that is just way too on the nose and not even subtle at all. And just the fact that you can't really necessarily pinpoint exactly whether or not everything that happens with the woman in black is all in her head or it's actually real or it's a combination of both. It's just confusing and muddled and messy, and it doesn't need to be. And a lot of it really does seem like we didn't have enough for a feature film, but we're going to stretch things out. We're going to pad things out. We're going to try to throw things at the wall and see what sticks, and just throw everything together without much of a focus in the end. It's just such an unfocused script and story in a multitude of different ways. And the ending, in my opinion, while somewhat different than the norm, it just raises even more questions because of all the tonal inconsistencies and just how just really messed up the message is. It essentially idealizes suicide. I know that's not what some people interpret it as. I know there's a couple different interpretations of the ending. Some people have an interpretation of the ending where it's not idealizing it. It's showing how when you're in this mindset and you're depressed and the depression takes hold and you take your life, there's all these things that are lying to you, that your mind is lying to you and it's manipulating you in the same way that the woman in black is manipulating Ramona until she ultimately kills herself. Okay, all right, I can see that, but the ending throws a wrench in that with this idealized afterlife where everything is all hunky dory and it's all, uh, in essence, a heavenly perspective, a heavenly purgatory for Ramona to live out the rest of her afterlife in. The other interpretation I've seen is actually a positive one, that she actually does triumph over this negativity and this darkness. That's why you have this line dialogue where she says, "Oh, we don't have to worry about this woman coming back anymore." And I would be okay with that if the rest of the ending actually matched that. It doesn't, though. So I don't understand that interpretation. She says that, but there's nothing concrete behind it because of what happens afterward. It seemed like this writer saw the Babadook and was like, hey, I want to do something like that, but not put as much effort into the characterization or into other aspects of the story, and just have a bunch of vague concepts and ideas and themes and just kind of throw them in there and hope for the best. That's really what it seems like. This is very much like a poor man's Babadook. I love the Babadook. I think the Babadook is great, and I think a lot of people actually misinterpret the Babadook to this day, because there's a lot of people who still have this concept that the spirit wasn't real in that movie, despite the director saying otherwise. And I think it's a similar kind of thing that I think Sam is trying to do with this script. He's trying to make it like the Babadook, where the spirit is real, but it also is a manifestation of someone's trauma and their grief and their depression. And instead of there being a cathartic moment at the end, a moment of triumph like in the Babadook, instead it's the opposite. What if the Babadook won? And that's what the woman in the yard definitely feels like. And I think in an anthology, that's something that works better than in a feature film. And it would have, I guess, maybe been something I would have been able to deal with more if it didn't normalize or idealize the act of somebody taking their own life as much as this script ultimately did. And that's a big part of why I don't like this movie at all, is because of that. I just don't think you should be idealizing suicide, period. Even if it is supposed to be this, oh, it's in her head or it's all fake, you're still idealizing it in a certain way, because the afterlife that she's a part of after she takes her own life is ideal. And it didn't help either that there was just a lot of just dragged out stuff, dialogue that really was kind of clunky at points, and just a lot of just really heavy themes and not really much levity whatsoever. And it got not only depressing and dark, but also really dull, because there's not a lot that really happens throughout the plot of The Woman in the Yard. I mean, even the stuff that the woman in black or the woman in the yard does. I keep saying woman in black because she might as well be. She wears black. And the stuff that this woman does is just not that exciting or interesting. Just some poltergeist stuff. A shadow will show up on the wall every now and then, and that's really about it. So even the woman in the yard, the manifestation itself is boring in terms of what it does in the end. So you have a boring script for the most part that's stretched way too thin, and then you have an incredibly tone deaf twist ending that idealizes suicide. The cast, they're doing the best that they can, and honestly, I think the cast is actually one of the best parts of this film. Similar to the direction by Sarah, I think the performances are all pretty solid across the board, especially from Danielle Deadwyler, who plays Ramona. But I also liked Okwui Okpokwasili, who played the woman, or Russell Hornsby, who played Ramona's husband, and Peyton Jackson as Taylor, Ramona's son, and Estella Kahiha as Annie, Ramona's daughter. So I think the cast delivers and turns in some pretty solid, pretty strong performances. The cinematography by Paweł Pogorzelski. I'm sorry, definitely butchered that, like I butchered some of the actors and actresses' names. The cinematography is not too bad either. It's a nice looking film for the most part, except there are some scenes where it's a little too dark. The editing by Timothy Alverson and Christiansen Amajdik, though, it's a little rough. I think there are some moments where I think it's a little haphazard in terms of the way that scenes were cut together, and I think that definitely hurt the film a little bit. The music by Lauren Balfe, I didn't mind either. I thought it had a pretty all right score. It's not a personal favorite of mine, but I like that it wasn't just mood music. He did actually put an effort into composing a score that has a multitude of different kinds of notes. It wasn't just droning background music. So I definitely did appreciate that when it comes to the film. And thankfully, it is very short, but it still drags because it just isn't that effective of a story with its characterization, the plot, and pretty much anything else. It's more of a drama than it is a horror film, too. So it's another one of those horror movies where it's really more of a family drama than it is a horror film. And that can work, like The Babadook, but it can also fail spectacularly, like The Woman in the Yard. So anyway, yeah, that's just my thoughts on The Woman in the Yard. And as always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you later. See ya.